Is an island ever just an island, or does it become something more the moment the world notices its coordinates? Bitra, an island so tiny you could walk its entire length in less time than it takes to finish your morning tea, has suddenly become the focus of national headlines and local outrage. So, why should you, anywhere in India, or frankly anywhere in the world, care about Bitra? Because what's happening here is a collision between security and survival, between national interest and native rights. It's a test case of how a government manages its smallest, most vulnerable frontiers. The residents of Bitra, all 278 of them, have lived in isolation, coexisting with the tides and traditions for generations. But now, they are staring at the real possibility of being displaced not for industry, not for tourism, but for defense. The stakes are real, and not just for a handful of families. What happens in Bitra will set a precedent for every far-flung Indian territory, every island, every indigenous community. And at its heart, this is about a nation's right, some would say obligation, to secure its borders in an increasingly uncertain world. Let's break down the facts. On 11 July 2025, the Lakshadweep administration notified its intent the entire Bitra Island would be acquired under the Land Acquisition Act of 2013. The reason? To hand it over to central defense agencies. This isn't coming out of the blue. India has, over the past 2 years, significantly upgraded defense facilities in Minicoy and Androth to other strategic outposts in the Lakshadweep archipelago. Why Bitra? Geography is destiny. It sits in the Amindivi subgroup, just north of Perumalpur, and its location makes it a natural sentinel over key shipping lanes in the Arabian Sea. For a country that faces threats from transnational actors and rising Chinese naval presence in the Indian Ocean, every inch of strategic real estate counts. The administration claims this is about security, about safeguarding trade routes, and about projecting Indian power far beyond the subcontinent. The legal framework is the Right to Fair Compensation and Transparency in Land Acquisition, Rehabilitation and Resettlement Act, an act meant to ensure, at least on paper, that those displaced are compensated and rehabilitated. But here's the problem. The announcement was made with minimal consultation. The local MP, Hamdullah Saeed, has denounced the move, calling it a violation of both constitutional protections and basic decency. Save Bitra Island has trended on social media. Protests have erupted in Kochi. Residents argue that their panchayat isn't even functional, making meaningful consultation impossible. A social impact assessment has been commissioned, and stakeholder consultations are supposed to happen within 2 months. But few on the ground believe this will change the outcome. So, what's really at stake? Start with the most obvious strategic imperatives. The Arabian Sea is not the quiet backwater it once was. China's footprint is growing, piracy remains a persistent threat, and regional actors from the Gulf to the Horn of Africa are recalibrating alliances. For India, losing the ability to monitor or respond from its own backyard would be negligent, possibly catastrophic. But, does that justify displacing an entire community? Here's the hard truth. Sovereign nations routinely override local interests for the sake of national security. The United States has done it in Guam and Diego Garcia. China has done it in the South China Sea, not just to its own people, but to entire archipelagos. When it comes to defense, governments rarely take prisoners, at least figuratively. Yet, there are questions of scale and necessity. Bitra's population is minuscule. Their economic impact is negligible. But what about their rights? The Right to Fair Compensation Act exists for a reason, to ensure that no citizen is rendered homeless or voiceless by the machinery of state. Will the compensation be enough? history suggests otherwise. In most cases, money fails to replace lost heritage, disrupted communities, or ancestral ties. Critics point to the lack of proper panchayat elections in Lakshadweep. How can there be free, prior, and informed consent when the basic structures of local governance are missing? Politically, the optics are fraught. The government risks alienating indigenous communities and providing fresh fodder to opponents who allege a pattern of bulldozing local interests. On the other hand, failing to act decisively could be interpreted as strategic weakness, especially when neighbors are flexing muscles across maritime borders. There is also the question of environmental risk. Bitra is fragile, barely 2 meters above sea level, a heaven for marine life. Militarization will change its ecology, probably irrevocably. But then, is it possible to secure the nation and leave its borders unguarded? For India, the choice is grim. Ignore the need for security, and you gamble with the nation's future. Prioritize it, and you risk trampling over the rights of your own citizens. Is there a third way? Can technology, minimal footprint bases, and serious investment in community consultation soften the blow? Or is this, as some critics claim, simply the cost of living in a dangerous neighborhood? Bitra is more than a speck on the map. It is a crucible testing how far a democracy can stretch between national interest and individual rights. The coming weeks will see consultations, protests, and possibly some compromise, but the outcome will resonate far beyond Lakshadweep. Will this escalate? It depends on the willingness of the government to listen and the ability of the community to make itself heard. One thing is certain, India's smallest island is now at the center of its largest debates. And perhaps, as Bitra's story unfolds, the nation will be forced to answer an uncomfortable question: how much are we willing to give up in the name of security?